Just as I am, though tossed about with many a conflict, many a doubt, fightings and fears within, without, O Lamb of God, I come, just as I am, thou wilt receive, wilt welcome, pardon, cleanse, relieve, because thy promise I believe, O Lamb of God, I come, I come.
And going through that experience, I want to give you a special commendation. Dietrich and I went to 2 different churches while we were in Florida. And one church we went to, we were greeted at the door. Whoever opened the door, the greeter, the professional greeter, I guess I'll call him, said hello to us, but not one other person spoke to us the time we were there. The second church that we went to, we got there a little bit late. It was a smaller church. We had a little bit of trouble finding it. And they were in their Bible class, and they stopped class, and everybody came and greeted us. And we got to shake hands with each one of them and welcomed. After service was over, they surrounded us. They gave us a nice little gift and a thank you. They talked to us and wanted to stay as long as we were willing to visit with them. And so I thought it was such a contrast. And that second church just reminded me of being at home, about how friendly and how wonderful you are about greeting each other. And I wanted you to know how important it is if you are visiting. If someone is visiting us, that they are greeted, that they are welcomed, and that they are known that they are loved and appreciated for taking their time to be with us, to worship. Because you never know who that one person is that's desperately seeking a connection, desperately seeking to know that there's hope. And you can make all the difference in the world. And so we saw that so vividly while we were in Florida, and I commend you for that. What did you want to be when you grew up? When you were young and your second grade teacher asked you, what do you want to be when you grow up? What was your answer? A nurse, okay. Do we have any doctors in here? No doctors?
Just like my daddy.
Just like my daddy? Okay. That's a good answer. How many of them said, men said maybe astronaut or pilot or fireman, policeman, something like that. I remember asking my youngest son what he wanted to be when he grew up. He wanted to be a trash man. The first toy that he ever asked for at Christmas time was a trash truck. You don't know how hard I had to look through Walmart and all the toy stores to find him a trash truck. But every time the trash man would come by, he would hear the truck coming down the street. He would run out there and watch him, and he was so excited. But later on, he decided he wanted to dress up every Halloween as a soldier. You may have seen some of our kids on Halloween. They'll dress up. Every Halloween, he dressed up like a soldier. And after 9/11, when he graduated from high school, he became a soldier and intended to have his full career in the military. and served 10 years there. And so sometimes we have those childhood aspirations that work out. Sometimes we have those childhood aspirations that we change, or we realize that we can't attain them. But one of the things that's so important, a difference between childhood and adulthood, is that at some point we have to mature. At some point we have to grow beyond our understanding. Tell you one other story. There was a time in 1997 in August. I had a benign growth in the sphenoid sinus at the center of your head that they tried in January to take it out unsuccessfully. They were going back in August to get it a second time. And with all the hospital paperwork, I had to show them that I had a will, that I had a medical power of attorney and a living will, and all of these other DNRs and all these other paperworks. And I had them on my desk that I had filled out and faxed into him, and I didn't realize that my oldest son had seen those papers. And I got a call from his mom and said that Quentin was upset. He had seen these papers and he wants to know what's going on. And so he was about 10 years old at the time. And so I sat him down and I started talking with him. And at the time, we were sitting there. I had a nice car. I had a Firehouse red sports car. At the time, I got it quite by mistake, but it was a sports car. And my sons often reminded me that I wasn't a teenager anymore when I would drive it. But and I had my nice computer that I use for my work, and we're sitting there. Had taken a ride in my car, and we're sitting there in front of my computer, and I told him that I was having this surgery and that the hospital required it, and that what a will was and why you filled out a will. And he said, so if something happened to you in this surgery, we would have to do something with all of your stuff. And I said, no, we have what's called an executor. The executor is going to take care of it and make sure that y'all get everything that you're supposed to. And he said, so how do they decide which is what? And it dawns on me. I said, well, everything would be y'all's immediately except for my car and my computer. I said, you get those when you're 35. And he said, oh, okay. Why 35? And I got to saw what he was really concerned about is, what am I going to get? I want to make sure that I get my claim in on the car and I get my claim in on the computer. And that's part of the things that we think of in our childhood, don't we? We think of the here and the now and what we get, what we receive. What we're going to see in our story today is that the apostles just quite haven't matured yet. They are still, in somewhat spiritual terms, spiritual babes, because Jesus is trying to get them to grow up and think beyond what do I get and what's in it for me, and grow up. We read in Ephesians 4, verses 11 to 16, and he gave the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the shepherds, and teachers to equip the saints for the work of the ministry, for the building up of the body of Christ, and until we all attain to the unity of the faith and the knowledge of the Son of God, to mature manhood. So what is it that brings us to mature manhood? Unity of the body. The unity of the body. And what is the standard? Verse 13 says, to the measure of the stature of the fullness of Christ. What's one of the other things that children have a tendency to do? When you said, just like my daddy, did y'all ever come up and compare yourself to your daddy? And see, my son would come and say, I'm as tall as you. And there was a saying I used to give my oldest son, someday, but not today. And he would go on, well, now my son's 6'5". That day has gotten here. My son is taller than, but we are to compare ourselves to the statue of the fullness of Christ. Our maturity comes as we begin to look more and more like Jesus Christ. so that we may no longer be children, tossed to and fro about the waves and carried about by every wind of doctrine, by human cunning, by craftiness and deceitful schemes. Rather, speaking the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ, from whom the whole body is joined and held together by every joint by which it is equipped, when each part is working properly, makes the body grow so that it builds itself up in love. So Jesus' goal is that we grow up, that we mature, and in that maturity it's bound in unity and in oneness of spirit and in looking like Christ. Open your Bibles to Mark chapter 10, where we're going to proceed into the story of where Jesus is going to tell and foretell his death a third time. He's trying to prepare, he's trying to grow, he's trying to mature his disciples to be able to be ready for what is about to come. He has left Galilee for the last time. He's making his way to Jerusalem. He is going there knowing what is ahead for him. We pick up reading in verse 32. And they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. It says going up to Jerusalem. They were actually headed south if you were to look at the map. But Jerusalem was a city of the hills. And so they were on the road that even though they were going south, they were going uphill all the way up the hills toward Jerusalem. Jesus was walking ahead of them, and they were amazed. And those who followed were afraid. And taking the 12 again, he began to tell them what was about to happen to him, saying, "See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and the scribes, and they will condemn him to death and deliver him over to the Gentiles. And they will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him. And after 3 days, he will rise." And so Jesus is trying again to prepare them for what is going to happen, for the brutality of what's going to happen. And we see in this particular story that as he goes on, he's starting to give more and more details about what's going to happen, right? There are other times when he said, I'm going and I will be put to death. But now he's starting to give details about how that's going to happen. He's going to be flogged. He's going to be scourged. He's going to be mocked. He's going to be spit on. He's filling in the blanks as to what it's going to look like for him when he faces this trial and death in Jerusalem. And so he's trying desperately to prepare them, to get them to understand. It says that Jesus was walking on ahead. This was not unusual. Why do you think Jesus would walk ahead of the disciples? What did the traditional rabbi do? The rabbi was the leader, correct? And so the rabbi would walk ahead and he would teach, and his followers would follow along behind. Is that the way leaders do it today? That's not the way the leaders do it today at all. They have their entourage out in front of them, right? Political leaders have the men dressed up in the suits with the earpieces and the sunglasses, and their heads are on a swivel, and their eyes are darting back and forth, and they have some of the celebrities will have their groupies out in front of them. That's not the way that Jesus was. Jesus was in front, and that was traditional. It says they were amazed. That's not why they were amazed that he was walking in front of him. Why were they amazed about him walking ahead of them, going to Jerusalem? Why do you think they were amazed?
There's been threats on his life in Jerusalem.
There have been threats on their life, and they knew it. In fact, we read a couple of weeks ago in our lesson, they even warned Jesus. When Jesus said, "I'm going to Jerusalem," they said, "Wait, don't you know that they want to kill you?" They warned Jesus not to go. And so they know, they're very well aware that the chief priests and the scribes and the Pharisees, the Sanhedrin, that why Jesus is number one on the Sanhedrin's top most wanted list. His picture is probably in every Jewish post office in Jerusalem. They know that he is a wanted man and that they're trying to kill him. And so they're amazed that he is so resolutely heading to Jerusalem. Jesus is displaying a courage that amazed. Now, as I was looking at this, I kind of realized that there are two kinds of courage, I think. There may be more, but I came up with two. That's as many fingers as I could count, I guess. But one type of courage I find very common is courage in the moment. And courage in the moment, I guess we illustrate it by you're walking down the street on the sidewalk and all of a sudden you see a car speeding down the road and you see a baby carriage get away from the mother. And the carriage rolls out into the street. And without thinking, you just run and you push that carriage out of the way and save the baby. That's courage in the moment, where you didn't have time to think about it. You just reacted. You had courage to save that baby over imminent death. But what if somebody told you 10 days ahead of time, okay, there's going to come a moment when there's going to be a baby roll out in front of a car, and you may or may not be able to save that baby. You may or may not make it. That car may take your life. You're going to have to decide whether you're going to save that baby or not. Okay, so you go living your life, and every car that comes down the road, you start turning your head looking for a baby carriage. And you look, and the time finally comes, and that baby carriage starts rolling out, and the thought crosses your head, I'm not guaranteed that I'm going to make it, that I'm going to be able to save the baby at all. What if both of us die for nothing? All those questions roll in your mind. That's a different kind of courage. Courage that endures. Courage that goes through in spite of full knowledge and full preparation for what's going to come. Another example I can give you that it's courage beyond my imagination, is picture the soldiers on D-Day storming the beaches of Normandy. And with the aid of Hollywood and computer graphics and all of these things now, we can kind of get a visual image of what it must have been like for soldiers getting out of those landing craft and trying to make it to the beach. With soldiers floating in the water deep red with the blood of those that have already been shot, and your sergeant, your commander, your captain, whatever, tells you to get out of that boat and try to make it to the beach. And everywhere around you, you see those that tried and didn't make it. But they did. Soldier after soldier got out of that landing craft and they stormed that beach and they took it. Full knowledge of what they were going into. That's courage that endures. That's courage that Jesus had when he had full knowledge of what he was going to face in Jerusalem. He set resolute. It says in some passage that Jesus was resolute to go to Jerusalem, that he had made up his mind that he was going to face what was in store for him. Do we have that same kind of courage today? Do we have that same resolute courage that we are going to do what God has asked us to do no matter what? When I think about it, I remember several occasions, and as I've said many times, when I teach, I look at all these passages and I look at my own life and my own failures, and I just see how much better I could have done, how much better I could have done at representing Christ in the world, of showing people what Christ can do for them. But when we have a meeting, for example, at work, and they say, get in groups of 10 or 15 and tell about yourself. Tell about what your interests are, what your hobbies are, what important things you like to do. How about them Cowboys? You know, I know they haven't made the Super Bowl in 20-something years, but, you know, there's always this year. And, well, yeah, I know that our quarterback got hurt, and he got hurt again. And We've already lost these games, but I still believe. And, I bought a new boat. Let me tell you about my boat. It's got a 450 horsepower Mercury, and I go out fishing. I do all this, and I got 4 grandkids. We tell them about everything in our life except what's truly important. How many times are we willing to step out there and be different, to be called out, to say, you know what? I have a wife and 4 or 5 kids. I have grandkids. We're members of such and such church, and someday I would look forward to telling you about it. I want you to know what I found. Do we have that kind of courage? Do we have the courage that when the world and the politics are telling us you can't stand up for Christ, you can't pray in schools, you can't represent yourself, you don't offend anybody by telling them the truth that's in the Bible? Do we have resolute courage that in spite of what the world can bring, we are going to seek to do God's will? Are we going to approach what the world has to bring with resolute courage? So Jesus was walking ahead. They were amazed. It says, they that followed were afraid. Why were they afraid? What did they have to be fearful of?
That they too would be subject to being killed.
And was that a real fear? Because what did Paul do? When after the stoning of Stephen, what did Paul go to the chief priest and got letters to do what? To imprison anybody that was calling on the name of Jesus. Anybody that associated with him, Jesus. So this was a real fear. They had reason to be afraid. But one thing that we have to give to their credit is they still followed. They still followed Jesus, even toward Jerusalem. Now, one of the things we talked about, courage in the moment. Courage in the moment sometimes fails, doesn't it? What happened after the scene at the garden when the soldiers took Jesus? Where was the courage in the moment? They all fled. They all fled. But were they able to come back with resolute courage? Absolutely. Because we read later in the book of Acts where they were gathered together and they rejoiced that they were worthy to suffer shame for the cause of Christ. Their resolute courage they were able to develop, even though, and even with us, sometimes our courage fails in the moment. Sometimes when we're given that opportunity to step up for Christ, we fall short. But we need to remember that it's the resolute courage that gets us through. It's the strength of Jesus to see that we can face whatever lies ahead. And so he goes on and he begins to foretell his death. See, we are going up to Jerusalem. The Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests. What do you think he means by the Son of Man will be delivered? He doesn't say the Son of Man will be taken, right? Or captured. Or arrested. What does he say? The Son of Man will be delivered. Do you think he's indicating them a little foretelling about betrayal? That someone is going to hand me over to be crucified. This is not going to be the Romans are going to come and capture us and take me. Someone is going to deliver me over. And they will condemn him to death and deliver him to the Gentiles. And they will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him. But what is the power of the very next statement? And after 3 days, he will rise. He's letting them know there's going to come a time of tribulation and suffering like you have never seen. But the end of the story is this: I will rise. I will conquer death. He is telling them, no matter what Satan can throw at him, no matter what the world can bring, Jesus is going to be victorious. He is not going to stop at telling about his death. He begins to tell them of his resurrection. Then let's move on to the next story, which I find so very curious. Beginning in verse 35, and James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said, Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. Have your kids ever done that? Dad, will you do me a favor? Or a friend come up and say, Milt, would you do me a favor? I know I did that to Russ the other day when I asked him to teach class. It kind of puts you on the spot, doesn't it? What do you expect? When somebody comes up and says, Tom, will you do me a favor? What do you think that person is expecting?
Me to do it.
Absolutely. Why? Why would I expect you to do it?
Confidence.
Confidence in what?
To do it.
To do it? Frankie? The friendship or relationship. We're playing on the relationship, aren't we? When we ask somebody, would you do me a favor? I'm banking that I've got a good enough relationship with you, that I've gotten enough love credits in my account with you, that you're going to do what I want you to do. James and John are coming up to Jesus and asking him, Jesus, we want you to grant whatever we ask. And does Jesus fall for it? And he says, what do you want me to do? I have learned to qualify my answers that way. Possibly, what would you like? What's really funny is the look on somebody's face when they say, would you do me a favor? And you say, no. It's like shock. But Jesus just says, well, tell me what you want me to do for you. And they said to him, grant us to sit, one at your right hand and one at your left, in your glory. They're asking for the prominent positions in the kingdom. It would be today like saying, let me be vice president and let me be your chief of staff. We want the top positions. We want the positions of power. We want the positions of prominence. We want to be seen. Because when Jesus is seen, wouldn't you see people that are on his right and his left? They wanted fame, they wanted power, they wanted position. Now, I will tell you that there are some occasions where some people think this is the same occasion where James and John's mother asked. Some other scholars believe that those two stories are the same. One of them says their mother urged them to do it, and this is where they did it. The other ones, other scholars believe no, they wanted it and they didn't have the courage, so they asked their mom to go do it for them. Either way, we know that on their behalf, they approached Jesus and asked to sit at the right hand or the left in glory. And Jesus said, you don't know what you're asking. You really don't understand yet. You haven't gotten the picture. Can you imagine the look on Jesus' face when they come up and they ask him, we want to sit on your right hand and your left when you come into your glory? They just don't get it.
But yet I think he had great love and compassion for them. I think
Just like we do our children, right? We can be disappointed in our children. We can wish that they had matured beyond that level. But what do? Do we just slap them down and say no and send them on their way? We teach them, right? We try to instruct them. We try to help them mature. And exactly what Jesus says. He says, you don't know what you're doing. And he said to them, you don't know what you're asking. Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or to be baptized with the baptism that I am to be baptized? The interesting thing here is the same word, baptizo, is used here as is when it talks about baptism in Acts 2:38. So, but he's not talking about that type of baptism here. He's talking about being immersed in suffering. Are you willing to be totally inundated with the suffering that I'm about to suffer? Are you willing to drink the cup that I am about to drink? The cup of the wrath of God. There's an Old Testament image, an Old Testament tradition about the cup of the wrath of God. Jesus is making reference to this. Are you able to drink from that cup? Do you have any idea about the suffering that you're asking for? And it says, we're able. I looked in the Texas translation. It says, you betcha. No thought, no real anticipation about what that really meant. Absolutely. Just I mean, I can just hear it. They're going, ka-ching. We got it. We're in. We are going to be the leaders of the kingdom. And so Jesus goes on to teach them. Yes.
One thing that struck me is the juxtaposition of the prior. You know, they were worried and afraid.
Mm-hmm.
Jesus says, "I'm about to go die," and then James and John, who had been leaders within the group, Jesus had utilized them in leadership roles. It's not a big stretch that they would say, well, what about the continuity of power or continuity of the movement? If Jesus is going to go up and die,
Very much.
we need to step in and carry on with all of this and manage everything in his absence.
Russ is talking about the line of succession. They thought, well, if we get to be the vice president and the Speaker of the House, we get to move up. When Jesus dies, if he dies, then we get to take over. It's
not that we get to take over, but if the movement is going to continue, if Jesus dies, then everybody's going to go back home, maybe.
right.
And so maybe they're wanting to kind of keep everything going
Okay.
and to perpetuate.
Possible that they can keep the movement alive, that they can keep it going, and that they can become the new leaders of the Christian movement. And so, but it is a juxtaposition. They were talking about how they were afraid, and now they're ready to sit at the throne. But Jesus goes on to teach. The cup that I drink, you will drink, and with the baptism that I am baptized, you will be baptized. But to sit at my right hand or my left is not mine to grant, but it is for those to whom it has been prepared. Jesus knows what's going to happen to them. He knows that what they've asked for, they're going to get. We later read that James was the very first martyr after the death of Christ, that he was the first one to be put to death. And though John was never put to death, he was exiled, and many attempts were made on his life during his life, but he spent his last years in complete exile on the Isle of Patmos. They both endured great suffering. John was cast into prison many times, and so they endured suffering, but they didn't really understand what they were asking for. And then Jesus goes on to say, but to sit at my right hand or my left hand is not mine to grant, but it is for those to whom it has been prepared. What do you think he means by that? I don't have the authority to grant those positions. Doesn't Jesus have all authority? Why would he say it's not mine to give?
Because he didn't have all authority. That was the Father's authority to make that decision.
That was the Father's authority. Jesus came not to do his own will, but the will of the one who sent him. Jesus submitted his will to the will of the Father. And he gave up much of his authority to become a man, to come to earth. And so it was not his to give because he had submitted his will to the Father. And how do we know that this was maybe not the maturity that Jesus wanted to get to? We look in Ephesians. What is the maturity he's looking for? Unity. Did what James and John asked for, was that something that promoted unity? Absolutely not. How do we know? The very next verse. And when the 10 heard it, they began to be indignant at James and John. And Jesus called to them and said to them, you know that those who consider rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and the great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. Whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve, and to give his life a ransom for many. Again, Jesus is trying to teach them this concept. We read back only one chapter earlier in Mark chapter 9, they want to know who was going to be the greatest. This seemed to be a common concern with them about who was going to be the greatest in the kingdom. They come back here, and Jesus reminds them that this worldly standard of power is not the standard that I give. The standard that I give is not lording, but serving. And I think it's very, very interesting that he uses two different words here. It says, but whoever would be great among you must be your servant. And whoever would be first among you must be a slave. Was there a difference between a slave and a servant? One was owned. That's correct. The other one was free. You could be a servant. You could go in and put in your 9 to 5 and then go home. You still had your own rights. You still worked for somebody, but you weren't property. A slave is property. A slave gives up his freedom to be property of the one that he serves. And so Jesus says, whoever wants to be a leader among you, you have to be a servant. Wait a minute. Let me make it perfectly clear. If you want to be the greatest, you've got to be the slave. You've got to be the least. On the social hierarchy, you've got to be willing to be at the bottom. And how does he reinforce it again? Because even the Son of Man came to give his life. To give his life a what? A ransom for many. And it says in many passages we read, it is more blessed to give than to receive, right? And we often pray, God, we pray that you would bless us today, bless us as we ask for God's blessings on our safe journey, and back from our vacation, we ask for God to bless us with good health, and something that we ask for God's blessing. You want to be more blessed? How do you get to be more blessed? Give. It says very clearly, it is more blessed to give than to receive. So when we give, we become more blessed. Roger?
The word that's translated servant here is the same word that in other writings is translated deacon.
Yes.
So it's along the same concept.
Yes. And that's what the original deacons were chosen for. Is they were chosen to serve the church, to meet a need. And so he tells them, and again, he doesn't give up on them, on their lack of maturity. He teaches and he grows them by his teaching. And he goes on to show them by what? By his example about what makes for great service. Our leaders, when he talks about our leaders, what are our leaders? When the president comes on, what do they start playing? Hail to the chief. And I think, there are lots of politicians. They would give anything to be able to hear that play when they entered a room. When Jesus comes in, it's not hail to the chief. When it says, when you come into a place, what seat should you take? The lowest seat. And then let the master of the festival come and bring you to a position of higher. That's what Jesus offers, is God will raise us up if we're willing to lower ourselves down. Jesus continued to be revolutionary in the way that he taught. And now let's read on down, beginning in verse 46. Jericho was a city that was right outside of Jerusalem. And so they're making their way to Jerusalem. They first come to Jericho. And they came to Jericho, and as he was leaving Jericho with his disciples and a great crowd, Bartimaeus, a blind beggar, the son of Timaeus, was sitting by the roadside. And when he heard that it was Jesus of Nazareth, he began to cry out and say, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. Now Bartimaeus is a blind beggar, and in that tradition, much as we see today, I mean, can you go just about any corner around our neighborhood without seeing somebody asking for help? That's much the way it was then. They take the prominent corners, the prominent intersections to ask for help. Bartimaeus was there, and it was traditional that they would set out their coat. They would lay it in front of them, and people would come and give their gifts and lay them on the coat. And Bartimaeus, one of the things about blind men and women is they have other senses that heightened, do they not? And what do blind people tell you that their number one sense that heightens is? Their hearing. Their hearing becomes acute, and they hear a lot. And so he's at one of these prominent intersections, and he's probably heard a lot of things through the years of people passing. And so when he hears this commotion going on, and he wonders what's going on, they say, Jesus of Nazareth is coming. Evidently, he had heard about Jesus, because he knew that Jesus was special. He knew that Jesus would be able to do something. Because it says, he cried out, Jesus, son of David, have mercy on me. He knew that the one that could help him was there. And so he begins to cry out. And he recognizes Jesus as the son of David. And he knows what Jesus can do is have mercy on him. And it says many rebuked him. And it says many warned him. Be quiet. Be silent. And again, the Texas version, dude, shut up. Be quiet. This is Jesus you're talking to. Be quiet. And it says, but he cried out all the more, Son of David, have mercy on me. And Jesus stopped and said, call him. And they called the blind man, saying to him, take heart, get up. He is calling for you. So now all these people that were rebuking him are now telling him, okay, you got what you asked for. He's calling for you. And so it says, and throwing off his cloak, he takes his coat and he just throws it away. All the money that he's collected just goes flying, because he knows that's not what's important. He knows what Jesus can do for him. And how do we know that he knows? He sprang up and came to Jesus. An important point about that, did he let the crowd keep him from reaching Jesus? No. He was not going to let the culture, he was not going to let the people, he was not going to let anybody come between us and him and Jesus. And my question, and what I learned out of this lesson, is who in my life am I going to let stand between me and Jesus, the one who can save me? Is it going to be the naysayers? Is it going to be people that try to embarrass me or shame me? Or is it going to be somebody that I love more than Jesus? Who am I going to allow to stand between me and the one who gives me life, the one who gives me healing? Bartimaeus refused to let anyone stand between him. And Jesus said to him, what do you want me to do for you? Bartimaeus is going, duh. That's the Texas version again. I want my sight. did Jesus know what Bartimaeus wanted? Absolutely. He wanted Bartimaeus to verbalize. He wanted him to say, to identify what he wanted. He also wanted the crowd to hear what Bartimaeus wanted, because he wanted them to see that he had granted him his wish. And Jesus said, "Go your way, your faith has made you well." And he immediately recovered his sight. And did he go his way? He says he followed him on his way, because Jesus' way had become his way. Do you remember what Ruth said to Naomi? "Wherever you go, I will go." That's what Bartimaeus was saying. Jesus said, "Go your way." Bartimaeus said, "Your way is my way." When we receive the healing, when we receive forgiveness, when we receive the mercy of God, Jesus' way should be our way. Thank you.